Hello, and welcome to this session of the Globe Summit, the Boston Globe's annual conference. Thank you for joining us both in person and virtually for an exciting series of discussions taking the Boston Globe's award-winning journalism beyond the page. My name is Sabrina Shankman, and I'm the Boston Globe's climate change reporter. I'll be moderating today's presentation of climate change and spirituality with Rainn Wilson, which means I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with Rainn for the next 30 minutes about the intersection of climate and spirituality, two topics that not everyone associates with the man best known for his role as Dwight Schrute on The Office, but topics that he knows intimately and has thought about and worked on extensively, including in his recent book, Soul Boom, which I'm very excited to talk about. Rainn, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So to the crowd, to all of you, please be sure to submit your questions on Slido, and later in our chat, I will do my best to get to them. Rainn, to start off, you were raised in the Baha'i faith, which I understand from your book helped shape your thinking about the world around you. Can you talk about how that framed your perspective on the earth and climate change from a young age?
Certainly. Thanks again for having me, and apologies, I look like I'm in a jail cell, but I assure you I'm in a PR office. It has a nice plant in the corner. So, so I was raised a member of the Baha'i faith. I left it for a long time and came back kind of later in my adulthood. And a lot of the ideas from the Baha'i faith and inspiration from that faith tradition have inspired my work, and especially ideas in my most recent book, Soul Boom, Why We Need a Spiritual Revolution. So one of the key ideas in the Baha'i faith is that every human being is on a twofold spiritual path. We have the spiritual path that is the one that most Americans are familiar with when they think of spirituality, right? This is a personal journey to become more kind, more compassionate. You're dealing with tests and vicissitudes that are besetting you at every juncture. How do you use spiritual tools and wisdom, communion, contemplation, prayer, meditation to help you along that journey? And it's mostly an inner journey, lowering anxiety, increasing serenity. So there's that path. Mm-hmm. But in the Baha'i faith, and in many other faith traditions, although they are not underlined nearly as much, there is another spiritual path that we all walk. And that is one that is in a service to a greater cause and a greater good that helps humanity move forward. So in the book, I talk about two TV shows from the 1970s. I talk about Kung Fu, mm-hmm. And I talk about Star Trek. So Kung Fu is, just in a super quick nutshell, for those that don't know, Kwai Chang Caine is a former Shaolin monk, and he's walking around in the cowboy days, and he's fighting racist cowboys all the time. That's like a synonymous with that personal spiritual journey. But Star Trek, I actually believe, is a very spiritual show, and it has to do with humanity's spiritual evolution and the role that we all play as individuals to help humanity move forward. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, says, let all men be concerned with ushering forth an ever-advancing civilization. So there is a spiritual mandate in the Baha'i faith to try and make the world a better place. And if you look at the behavior of Jesus, he wasn't just preaching personal salvation and kind of reducing anxiety, right? He was out helping the poor, feeding people, bringing communities together. He was ushering forward an ever-advancing civilization. The same with the Buddha. The Western ideas around Buddhism are very, very limited. If you go to the source and you read the writings of the Buddha and the Dhammapada, there are so many incredible writings about having so much compassion that you cannot live without reducing the suffering of others. You reduce your own personal suffering so that you can go into the world and reduce the suffering of others. So this is a very long-winded answer to say that there are spiritual ideas that connect with climate change when you look at the role that we all have to play in increasing community, increasing consultation, in uniting hearts, and in helping humanity reach that final stage in its evolution where we live together in peace and harmony and unity. I know it seems far-fetched. It may produce some eye rolls and like, oh God, that's so naive. But I do believe that world peace is possible, nay, even inevitable.
So in your own kind of personal journey and evolution, was there like a moment or a time that you remember kind of connecting some of that spiritual thinking to the work around climate change and what's happening on the planet?
Well, yeah, it kind of had, excuse the spiritual pun, but I kind of had a come to Jesus moment, which was, I guess for a Baha'i, it would be a come to Baha'u'llah moment. I had a come to Baha'u'llah wake up moment where I was reading a lot about climate change. I was deeply concerned about climate issues. I was exasperated at the climate denialism that's out there. And the only thing that I was doing was sending out an occasional angry tweet. And this was for years. And then I kind of had a cold, hard look in the mirror and was like, wait a minute. You got to put your money where your mouth is. You're not doing anything. You are a clueless elitist celebrity in elitist Hollywood, sitting around sending out an occasional angry tweet and not really educating yourself and not putting the work in. Because we live in a culture of protest right now. It's very easy to protest, especially with social media. You can just, you can put up a rainbow, LGBTQ rights thing on your Instagram, and you feel like you've made your difference. And there, I've done my bit for gay rights, right? You can put up a climate change post and feel like, or you can tweet about an injustice that's happened out there. The hard work is building consensus, building community, volunteering your time, sacrificing your time, money, comfort, and status to work for something larger than you. So that's when I teamed up with this wonderful scientist, climate communicator, Dr. Gail Whiteman, and joined the board of Arctic Base Camp, now Climate Base Camp. And we've been doing a bunch of activations and where it's pretty small. It's catch as catch can, but at least I feel like I'm doing something. So, in every religious faith, there is the talk about, in the Bible, it's the book of James says, faith without deeds is dead. Baha'u'llah says, let deeds, not words, be your adorning. So we have to, the great spiritual teachers urge us to get off our butts and actually do something.
Yeah, I think there's something really interesting too, especially when it comes to climate change, because there's so much grief that's very real about when you think about climate change. But when I talk to a lot of folks in the climate movement, whether it's scientists, policymakers, advocates, whomever, they talk about action as being a way to get through that grief to something that's more productive. And I wonder if that is something that you've experienced in your own life.
Yeah, that is a great question, and we could have a whole half-hour conversation just on that question, because it really has to do with human nature and mental health. And for a lot of younger folk today, climate eco-anxiety is very, very real. And it's so real that young people feel overwhelmed and kind of stuck, and they feel like their actions, their votes, the efforts that they can make and take really don't amount to a hill of beans. And it's yet another reason to kind of throw in the towel on life. So it's really important for anyone working in this space to validate that way of feeling. And I certainly can feel that way. I'm kind of working in the space, and I'll read some of these articles, and it's like, I can't even bring myself to read the articles in the wonderful Boston Globe newspaper because they're so depressing. And I'm like, oh, oy, so it's really important to foster hope and bring joy and inspiration, and to really truly tap into that. Maybe it's that little tiny voice inside of us that believes that we can make a difference and things can get better. And to harness that energy and truly believe like we can make a difference. We're turning a corner. We're already, doing better than we were 10 or 20 years ago. Let's keep going. Come on, humanity. And activate friends, get together with groups of people, read texts, and start to move the ball forward. So it's important to combat the natural pessimism. And by the way, the world as it exists, the current political systems, the current power systems want us to be pessimistic, and they want us to be cynical. Because when you're pessimistic and cynical, nothing gets done. So I'm really glad that the founders, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and the founders of the civil rights movement, were not sitting back saying, we'll never change it. We can never make a difference. Who cares about a lunch sit-in or a bus, protest or a march in Selma? It'll never change. I'm glad that they believed that they could make a difference and an impact.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was this very deliberate attempt by the fossil fuel industry years ago to put the onus on individuals and kind of revolutionize this idea of your own personal carbon footprint. So it's up to you to fix the climate. So go ahead and do it, as opposed to paying attention to what was going on with the production of fossil fuels and our addiction to fossil fuels. And now there seems to be this shift toward more of what you're talking about in the book and what you've talked about in other places too, of being more community-minded and realizing like yes, I'm going to do what I can, but it's also about how I pitch in on a bigger stage and in a bigger way.
Right. But let me just address that real quick. You're very astute and 100% right about that. And it's something that I struggle with, because as individuals, we can certainly reduce our carbon footprint and order less from Amazon, eat less meat, put in solar panels, drive electric. There's things that we can do. But you're 100% right. The changes have to be made institutionally and globally, and they really have to do with the fact that over a quarter of the world's energy comes from coal still in 2023. And we need to let companies know how we feel about sustainability. We need to, if people are watching that have, their money in savings, we need to let our where we put our money and in our relationships with corporations, because corporations and their boards do listen to consumers, and that's a good place to start, as well as what you do with your vote.
Yeah. So coming back to this idea, some of the ideas that you raise in the book, you talk about how in the Baha'i faith there's this kind of thinking around carrying two things at once, two opposing ideas, destruction and creation at the same time. And I'm curious, how you carry that with you as you think about climate change and our response to it.
Yeah, thank you. So another idea that I basically stole from the Baha'i faith and repackaged for the purposes of selling some books is this idea that there are twin opposing forces going on in the world at the same time. There are forces of disintegration and there are forces of integration. So the disintegration we see, like income inequalities going through the roof, climate change, there's, partisan politicization, people are at each other's throats, their systems seem to be collapsing, healthcare, education, things are increasingly not working because they're set up on an old way of doing things, a way of, competition and one-upsmanship and kind of hyper-toxic individuality. And at the same time, there are forces of integration that are bringing people together and setting them on a good course, and there are positive changes happening in the world. And this is a very difficult dichotomy for young people to process, this idea, because they look around, they're like, oh, so much bad crap going on. This is terrible, it's so depressing, I'm overwhelmed by it. It's like, yes, and there's also a lot of great stuff happening. There's Me Too, and there's, the racial movements that came up after George Floyd, and there are, Greta Thunberg started a whole youth climate revolution, just one little Swedish girl out with a sign protesting in front of Swedish parliament. And that launched, millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of young people being engaged in climate. Now, it's not the end, but it's one small evidence that there are movements toward positivity, progressive positivity. And that's where we need to put our focus. So from a mental health standpoint and from a spiritual standpoint, it's kind of like, oh yeah, things are falling apart. We get to witness that. The old systems are collapsing and they're not sustainable. They're not sustainable. So let's put our focus toward where we can make a difference and the people that are making a difference.
Yeah. In your book, you have this great exchange where it's aliens that are having a dialogue, looking at, like one's reporting back from status on planet Earth and the other's asking questions, kind of incredulous about where things stand, somewhat understandably. And I'm curious, for those who haven't had a chance to read the book yet, if you could talk a little bit about that and about, if you were an alien, what would you say? Like, how are we doing?
Well, I'm impressed that you actually read my book, so thank you very much for that. Number one. Yeah, it was a podcast idea I had about, 6 or 8 years ago, and I ran by some podcast producers, and I didn't really pitch it wide, but I was always fascinated. I guess I grew up, again, from a great 70s and 80s television show, Mork from Ork, with Robin Williams, where Mork is down on planet Earth reporting about how humans behave, and he's bunking, no, Mork and Mindy, sorry. And he's roommates with Mindy, the great Pam Dauber, crush of my heart. But I always think, like, first of all, this new data that has come out about the UFOs, UAEs they're now called, is uncontrovertible. Like, it used to be that if you believed in UFOs, you were like tinfoil hat wearing cuckoo. Like, now, if you don't believe in them, you're a cuckoo and you're in denial. Because when you look at the footage and hear the interviews with these pilots from all around the world, it is staggering. So putting that aside, I always thought about, like, well, if there's aliens, what are they doing? Well, they're observing humanity, probably. What would they be saying about us? So it's a great lens for a conversation about humanity. Because if you were just a completely alien species and you were just looking down on planet Earth, the first thing you'd notice is, like, wait, they're poisoning their atmosphere. Don't they know that there's 3 billion cars spewing CO2 nonstop into the atmosphere for 100 years? Like, do they not know? Look at all the coal plants. Like, what's going on? Look at all the oil and gas exploration. What is going on? Like, what are they thinking? And then you dig a little deeper. It's like, oh no, they know. They've known for decades. Oh, yeah. But they're so under the sway of, kind of spin in the media and, and lobbying efforts from oil companies, et cetera. So it was a fun and lighthearted way to kind of have a discussion about how crazy us humans are. But it doesn't end there. It's, if you were to float 20,000 miles above planet Earth and look down at how we do things, you would really see how ridiculous our current systems are.
I think why I liked that exchange so much is it did bring this kind of lens of comedy and levity to the absurdity of the moment that we're in, especially when it comes to climate change. And I want to talk to you about the other hat that you wear, which is a comedian, as someone who lives in the world of comedy. And what is the role, do you think, of comedy in helping tell the climate change story and bring more people, under the umbrella?
Well, my only way to kind of answer that is to talk a little bit about something I know you're going to bring up about Arctic Base Camp and this new kind of spin-off project, Climate Base Camp, because these nonprofits that I've been working with we're trying to do really fun and accessible activations that bring attention to climate in a completely unique way. Because, listen, comedy plays a really important role. This is really important to understand, in my experience. Most of the climate activism work and nonprofits are preaching to the choir. They're making short documentaries and holding conferences for people who already believe in climate change, are doing something about climate change, and are committed to climate action. So that's a waste of time. And conversely, it's also a waste of time to try and convince people that believe that climate change science is some kind of Democrat plot to increase the size of government and increase taxation. And that it's not real or it's not urgent, right? You're going to waste your time shouting at that group. So there's a population in the middle. There's the movable middle. It's people in their 20s in Iowa and Nebraska that are growing up online and really believe in the science of climate change, but they're going back to families that are skeptical of climate change, and so they don't know what to think. So how do you reach them? With data and with hard science and with doom and gloom? No, that's not really going to work. So you have to think outside of the box. And as part of Arctic Base Camp and Climate Base Camp, we've done a number of really fun kind of activations to try and engage young audiences. I did this documentary series called An Idiot's Guide to Climate Change, where I went around to Greenland with a bunch of scientists and made a fool of myself and talked about climate. It's a super low budget kind of YouTube documentary, but it's really a lot of fun. And that got hundreds of thousands of views. And we did a Arctic Risk name changer, which was a dumb little stunt where you could enter your name and then it gives you an Arctic Risk name that you can put on social media. So I changed my name to Rainn Extreme Weather Forest Fire Wilson or something like that. And this got a lot of attention in the press, and hundreds of thousands of people, 300,000 people changed their name using the app. And most of them put it up on social media. So it was a tiny little thing, but again, using social media, using comedy. One of the things we did is at COP26 in Glasgow, we shipped an iceberg from Greenland to the conference, and we set it up outside of the conference center so that it was melting as all the attendees, the CEOs and heads of state were going into the climate conference. And then we bottled the water and we were passing out, bottled ice water. Can you tell me, so of 1 liter bottles, we had these 1 liter bottles of glacial melt water. Can you tell me how many bottles equivalent per second, 1 liter bottles per second are melting at the current melting rates?
Oh God, I couldn't even begin. I mean, it must be astronomical, especially with what's been happening this summer. Do you know the number?
17 million 1 liter bottles per second.
Per second. That is staggering. That is a staggeringly depressing number.
So how do you get information like that out to a young audience? I mean, we tried, I don't know how successful we were, but it's what we try and do at this new offshoot of Arctic Base Camp, Climate Base Camp. We're launching this week at UN Week. We're working with the World Economic Forum on it. The new website is going up very soon. What we're trying to do is speak science to culture in unique and interesting ways, using a lot of humor and visualizations that get people outside of the same old kind of dialogue.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, well, I think I read an interview that you gave around the time that the Idiot's Guide documentary series came out, and in it you said something about that the intent behind that was really to try to start reaching those people. You mentioned hundreds of thousands of people saw it. Do you have any idea of who those people were? Like, did you ever hear from like fans of The Office saying, I didn't really care about climate change, but now I feel like I know something about it and maybe I care now? What feedback did you get?
I don't read the comments because I learned that long ago. Yeah. Listen, I don't know, but I think Office fans is a great way in. I mean, that's a great way in, because one of the great things about The Office is we are not a blue state or a red state show. We are beloved across the heartland, and it's given me an incredible platform to try and make a difference. So we'll just keep going, trying to, wake people up and stimulate conversation. And that's kind of what Soul Boom is trying to do as well, is stimulate spiritual conversation about kind of societal transformation and how to use spiritual tools, not just for personal solace and transformation, but for social change as well.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought it back to Soul Boom, because a question that came in addresses the book. What avenues would you suggest people take if they want to further the discussion and intention of the work that you lay out in Soul Boom?
Fifth Avenue.
Well, this is Boston, so Com Ave would probably be better.
Commonwealth Ave. Yeah. Kendall Square.
There it is.
I did 1 year at Tufts University. I love Boston. What I'm trying to do at Soul Boom, so I wrote the book, and now I'm going to be starting a Soul Boom podcast. It's not out yet. We're still formulating it. And we're trying to reach young people on the Soul Boom Instagram and build a kind of a digital media and social media audience where, again, we start with conversation and probing life's big questions and building community through that. So with the upcoming podcast and with the social media work, I'm trying to engage young people to dig a little deeper, be a little more thoughtful, and look at using spiritual tools to make social change.
Very cool. All right, so we have time for one more audience question that I'm going to throw at you. All right. Alums of The Office reuniting and teaming up is like catnip for the press. Any plans to involve your old castmates in climate awareness efforts?
Well, as a matter of fact, we just did a shoot yesterday in New York City here for Climate Week. And it's a new campaign called Save the Flavors. So one thing is climate change is affecting a lot of plants that create our favorite flavors. Vanilla is in danger, cocoa beans are in danger, pistachios are in danger from climate. So we were handing out melting ice cream cones out of an ice cream truck saying, save the flavors, and talking about the flavors at risk. And I couldn't be there for personal reasons, long story, but Ellie Kemper from The Office showed up, was handing out ice cream cones and dove in. But I would love to try and harness the power of The Office cast for some climate action. And I thank you, whoever asked that question, for reminding me, because you're right. Who cares about Dwight Schrute? But when you get all the folks back together in a mini reunion, then The Office fans light up with glee.
People go crazy for that. And actually, we do have time for one other one that came in from the audience, which has to do with plastic waste. So 8% of carbon emissions globally come from producing plastic. I'm not fact-checking that on the fly, but that's what the questioner says.
I don't know about that stat.
Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was even higher. Can you say something about ending plastic waste?
Sure. So I don't know that statistic, and I'll look that up. And it gets confusing because plastics obviously are made from petroleum. So then if you include petroleum processing plants and petroleum excavation as part of producing plastics, then certainly that number is even higher than that. So, we're going to need plastics. We're going to need them as part of our life into the foreseeable future. So, but humanity could go a long way by reducing its plastic carbon footprint. And that's really like going to Starbucks and writing to Chick-fil-A and going to big companies like Amazon and saying, you don't need all those puffy plastic things that you put into all the boxes that you're shipping out millions every second. So these companies really do listen to consumers. And if we kind of beat the drum loud for reducing that plastic footprint and reduce them in our own lives, that could go a long way. But it's a much larger conversation than that, because some people recycle and then feel like they've done their bit and they're done. And it's going to take a lot more than recycling and reducing our plastic usage to fight this problem.
Absolutely. Well, sounds like we need to use our personal power, and then we appreciate that you've been using your platform to raise awareness around this. Rainn, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much for joining for this conversation. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
I really, really like your big green chair.
Thank you. I do too. I appreciate that. To everybody here in the audience and those watching virtually, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you'll stick around. There's some great sessions coming up ahead for the Globe Summit under this year's theme of today's innovators, tomorrow's leaders, so be sure to keep on watching. A quick reminder that all Globe Summit sessions are being recorded and will be made available for your viewing after the event. Thanks for being part of our community, and enjoy the rest of the event.